I'm foolhardy enough to have free-handled a Sydney funnel web spider, but this ant still makes me think twice about getting too close. In the creepy crawly department, Australia's spiders tend to get the lion's share of the publicity, and with the continent hosting a suite of fascinating species from weird little wonders to fleet-footed giants, it's easy to see why. But I think Australia's insect life deserves just as much recognition as its spiders, for this continent is home to some of the most awe-inspiring insects in the world. Colossal phasmids amble amid the treetops, swaying to and fro in rhythmic unison with the breezes that ever rock their lofty perches. Katydids of every form pierce the cool stillness of the night with an ethereal serenade of buzzes, chirps, and other noises yet unnamed. And below them, the growls of many a subtropical rainforest play host to a moonlit patrol of fiercely armed and very jump-scare-savvy king crickets. Ow! And one group of insects whose miniature size and near constant presence has led to their careless dismissal by many, including I'll admit myself until rather recently, has some particularly formidable representation in the land down under. They are, of course, the ants. More than perhaps any other animal, ants have come to epitomize the phrase strength in numbers, creatures that are individually fragile and diminutive, but when the wrath of the swarm is stirred, become a force to be reckoned with. Here in Australia, however, there are ants so fierce and powerful that even on their own they can be a deadly adversary for many other inhabitants of the undergrowth. They are the bull ants. Bull ants comprise a genus called Myrmecia, which translates to mean ant. So yeah, a very specific name that really helps to set them apart from their relatives. Myrmecia is quite a diverse genus, with 93 species currently described and potentially many more awaiting classification. The sheer indistinctiveness of the genus name's translation does little justice to Myrmecia, for these, to me, are some of the most unique and captivating of all ants, and it doesn't take more than a cursory glance to discern them from the crowd, with their large size and long serrated mandibles making them difficult to mistake for any other ant. The mandibles alone would make for a respectable armature, yet they are but one and not the greatest of the weapons wielded by Myrmecia, for at the other end of the body, these ants possess a sting laced with potent venom. With the exception of a single species from New Caledonia, Myrmecia occur exclusively in Australia and its surrounding islands, and here in South East Queensland, one rather feisty species appears to be especially prolific. Here, right beside this path, is a colony of one of this country's most fearsome insects. These are Myrmecia nigrocincta. There's many species of Myrmecia out there, but this one, I think, is one of the most unique of the bunch. With its vibrant colour palette, sporting a bold pattern of alternating black and orange, further spiced up by a covering of iridescent hairs toward the rear, Myrmecia nigrocincta is among the most distinctive and recognisable of all Myrmecia species. And when you couple their flashy appearance with their tendency to be most active in broad daylight, you have an ant that's uncharacteristically difficult to overlook. Unlike many Myrmecia species, which principally forage close to ground level, Myrmecia nigrocincta is more partial to the high life, and though these ants construct their nests on the ground, much of their foraging is spent patrolling tree trunks and foliage high above their earthen dwellings. This is, of course, ill tidings for the countless small critters that live among the trees, for while they may be out of range for most other bull ants, they cannot so easily escape the ire of Myrmecia nigrocincta. Moving about this tangled, chaotic environment can be a challenge for any creature, let alone something as small as an ant. But Myrmecia nigrocincta has a special ability that alleviates some of the difficulties of traversing this intricate hunting arena. It's one of just a couple of Myrmecia species that go by the nickname of jumping jack ant or jack jumper ant, and there's no prize money for guessing where that name comes from, because these ants, in addition to possessing all of the usual weapons that make Myrmecia such fearsome predators, also possess one extra ability: they can jump. and they can quite easily clear multiple body lengths in a single bound. And I'm not even kidding when I say that as I'm sitting here talking to you, I can hear lots of little thudding noises as the ants leap and bound through the undergrowth. And there aren't too many ants out there that are big enough that you can hear them when they move.
The jumping behaviour that has earned Myrmecia nigrocincta its name is exhibited by a small number of other species that also bear the jack-jumper moniker. These include Myrmecia croslandi and, most famously, Myrmecia pelocula. And curiously, despite exhibiting very similar behaviours and acrobatic affinities, phylogenetic analyses show that within the genus, Myrmecia nigrocincta is not all that closely related to the other two jack-jumper species, occupying a more basal position in the Myrmecia family tree, which could indicate that their namesake jumping behaviour may have evolved independently in each of their separate lineages.
Even if you're as athletically gifted as Myrmecia nigrocincta, it's a dangerous business going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. So for any adventurer, great or small, it comes in very handy to have a good sense of where you're going, and perhaps just as importantly, where you came from. For most of the ants that we'd be familiar with in our everyday lives, special chemicals called pheromones are paramount to finding their way around. Scouts leave behind chemical scent trails, which guide other ants in the colony towards any food sources they may encounter. That's why it's so common to see ants moving in rows or columns. They're all following a trail of pheromones laid down by other ants that had embarked on the same journey before them.
But if you pause to observe a colony of Myrmecia, it shouldn't take long to notice that they don't appear to operate in the conventional ant manner. There's no sign of the orderly marching columns we so often associate with foraging ants. Instead, each ant emerging from the nest strikes out on a solo adventure, meandering off into the depths of the undergrowth to tackle the many perils and bounties of the wilderness on its own, unbeholden to the movements of those that journeyed before it. The behaviour of Myrmecia makes it pretty clear that they aren't simply being led hither and thither by chemical trails. So how are they finding their way around?
Should you dare to look closely at one of these ants, you'll see that behind those imposing mandibles are set a pair of eyes so large and prominent that they bulge quite visibly from the head. It's often said in biology that structure relates to function, and the more pronounced and well-developed a particular feature of an organism is, the more significant a role it's likely to play in the organism's life. So a pair of big, bulging eyes should be ample evidence that sight is an important sense for Myrmecia. And this becomes more apparent still when you focus on the antics of an individual ant as it goes about on its foray. Every now and then, the ant will momentarily pause, lift its head, and swivel around as if to survey its surroundings. Could these ants, perhaps, be relying on visual cues to navigate? Research has shown that not only is this almost certainly the case, the ants' usage of their keen eyesight is intriguingly sophisticated. Myrmecia, it's almost certain, use landmarks to guide themselves on their ventures, and the importance of landmarks to their navigation can be tested for, quite simply, by changing the visual scene and observing how the ants react. In one experiment, 3 dead trees in close proximity to a Myrmecia colony were cut down, and immediately after the removal of these prominent landmark features, the foraging ants were observed to walk in a slower, less directed manner, and to more frequently look back in the direction of their nest or scan their surrounding environment. It seems that the simple removal of a couple local landmarks had left the colony well and truly befuddled. Other observations have shown that younger ants, less familiar with their local territory, regularly engaged in learning walks, where they would move in a small loop around the near vicinity of the nest, all the while alternating their gaze between looking toward the nest and looking away from it. This behaviour is repeated over the course of multiple days, before the ants eventually begin to forage further afield. More experienced ants, meanwhile, are familiar enough with— thanks for the kudo, Digby, but I can't see the script anymore. More experienced ants, meanwhile, are familiar enough with the local scenery that they don't always need to bother with learning walks. However, if an experienced ant happens to be disturbed or relocated mid-foray, its subsequent foraging trips may be preceded by a quick learning walk, perhaps because the ant needs a little reacquainting with the local landmarks.
With their jagged mandibles and powerful sting, Myrmecia are not an ant to be trifled with at the best of times, and Myrmecia nigrocincta appears to be a uniquely unruly character even among this fearsome ensemble. On the hunting field, their eyesight and ability to jump gives them an edge over their prey, allowing them to rapidly close distance on their target before it has ample time to react. Then, they'll latch on to the hapless victim with their mandibles, before sealing the deal with a lethal dose of venom. But the ant does not itself get to relish the spoils of the hunt. The prey will instead be offered to her future nestmates, the larvae still growing and developing back at the colony. For the adult ants, meat is off limits for purely mechanical reasons. The ants' waists are so narrow that solid food cannot pass through, so they are restricted to liquid nourishment like nectar collected from flowers. Though we humans are most certainly not part of their menu, Myrmecia have little reservations vis-a-vis expressing their displeasure should we unwittingly impinge upon their home turf, and the consequences of such altercations can be unsavoury. Myrmecia are often touted as deadly, and not entirely without reason, for these insects have claimed a handful of human lives over the decades, with 6 recorded deaths occurring between 1980 and 2000. That's the highest body count of any native Australian insect, but not the highest of any insect in this country outright. That title belongs to the introduced European honeybee, which in terms of human kill count is not only Australia's deadliest insect, but its deadliest venomous animal overall.
But while the venom of Myrmecia is most certainly potent, its lethality, it seems, stems not from outright toxicity alone, but from its tendency to cause allergic reactions, and in this respect, the various Myrmecia species are far from equal. The venom of the aforementioned Myrmecia pilosula, a species that is behaviourally quite similar to Myrmecia nigrocincta, appears to have the greatest propensity to elicit allergic reactions, with Myrmecia nigrocincta itself occupying a distant second place. There's also something to be said about the temperament of Myrmecia nigrocincta, at least compared to any other Myrmecia species I've encountered. I don't generally find working with these ants to be an overly wearisome venture. At worst, their penchant for staying almost constantly on the move makes them rather annoying to film. But as a cross-country coach of several years, I have more than enough experience dealing with hyperactive little that can't stop running around. Myrmecia nigrocincta, on the other hand, can be a slightly more temperamental subject, which happens to be a key reason why the segments of me talking next to a colony were considerably briefer than I intended. For the most part, the ants were content with standing at the entrance of the nest and staring in a way that I would describe as faintly menacing. But while I was talking, I couldn't help but notice that a small number of them had made their way down onto the footpath, and were now advancing toward me in a strikingly deliberate manner, as clear an invitation as ever that my yap session had overstayed its welcome, and it would be in my best interest to vacate the premises.
This beetle, clearly endowed with a lot more bravado than myself, took the opposite approach, and just as I was getting some last-minute footage before departing, it streaked right through the ant's turf. It was, of course, immediately set upon, yet not only did this armoured fighter manage to survive the fearsome onslaught, it even slew one of the ants in the process.
Over the course of making this video, my own interest in Myrmecia has grown exponentially. Though Myrmecia nigrocincta was the only species I had decent footage of when I first commenced this project, hence my decision to make it the focal species, I've since crossed paths with multiple other Myrmecia in the weeks thenceforth, from the gaudy Myrmecia fulviculus with its iridescent gold abdomen to the imposing Myrmecia brevinoda, the biggest of the bunch, and every time I can't help but stare at them in wonder.
Intimidating as Myrmecia can be, not only because of their weaponry, but their uncharacteristically palpable levels of awareness. They are undeniably charismatic to an extent far beyond what we'd normally associate with ants. For many ants, it's easy to fall under the impression that they are mere automatons, biological robots guided by naught but instinct. And for those who do see them in that way, a close encounter with a Myrmecia can be a most eye-opening experience. When you look down at an ant, and it turns around and stares straight back at you, when you watch an ant walk about and see it not blindly following a trail, but pausing, raising its head, and visibly taking in the view like a wary adventurer embarking on their first solo hike, the ant's identity as a living, breathing animal becomes all the more appreciable. And with an interaction as simple as that, the barrier we build in our minds to separate the animals we deem charismatic, relatable, and worthy of our care from all the other critters so often dismissed as cold and unfeeling begins to erode.
Bull ants are something I've been aware of since childhood, but the fact that I've only just now come to appreciate how diverse and marvellous they are, and that all it took to spark my intrigue was a couple chance encounters with a single gateway species, is a prime example, I think, of why paying attention to the natural world at every scale can be such a boundless source of lifelong enthrallment. Though the passage of the years may dull the novelty of so many other ventures we may pursue, in nature there resides around every corner new wonders untapped and new rabbit holes yet unexplored. And that's why I like to see this channel not solely as a place for me to share my passions with you, but as a medium through which we can all discover new interests and new insights together. Myrmecia nigrocincta may have been the star of this video, but rest assured this isn't the last you'll see of Myrmecia, nor ants as a whole on this channel. If ants interest you, well, I don't currently have any other ant-focused content to treat you with, but mayhaps this video about spiders that mimic ants shall suffice in the meantime. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next adventure.